Joe Rogan slams the insane obsession with gender of the Nashville shooter. Is this a sign of a civilization at the brink of collapse? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about on today's episode, so let's do this.
You're listening to The Stephen Torriello Show, building a platform of liberty for people in search of truth with a dash of hope and a life worth living. The Stephen Torriello Show, and you never know where Stephen may go. And now, here's Stephen.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the show. So Joe Rogan slammed the cultural outrage over misgendering a school shooter. And he was speaking with the journalist Michael Shellenberger about how such an ideology is a sign of a civilization in decline. You guys may know Michael Shellenberger. He's kind of came into light. He's always been around, great journalist, but he's recently came into light with his Twitter files. Him and Matt Taibbi were giving their testimony on the House Oversight Committee, and the Democrats were just drilling these guys, trying to get these guys to reveal their sources. And Matt Taibbi, which is crazy, I was actually going to do an episode about it, but Matt Taibbi, that same day that he was giving his testimony about the weaponization of the government, the IRS knocked on his door talking about some past tax issues, or something to do with his tax returns or something like that. But what made it so weird is they don't go to your door. You usually get like a certified letter in the mail. So that was extremely strange, and Matt Taibbi has since not come out to talk about it because he said they were kind of still doing an investigation over it. But that is extremely concerning, folks. The day you're giving a testimony about how the government is being weaponized against its people, and you have Democrats on the stand drilling you, trying to get you to reveal your sources, and you get a knock on the door by the IRS, by the government. Oh, yes, folks, we are reaching insane times in this government, insane times in this country, and it's not just that. It's not solely the weaponization. That's actually happened before, with the church committee. So, but what is even more concerning, what we're seeing right now is is like a multi-front cultural war. And that's not even including the actual war, the kinetic war that I feel like we're going to be facing here in a few years, maybe even sooner. And I'm not the only one that says that either. Multiple generals have said it, so I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm not trying to be a panic monger or a fear monger. That has actually been said over and over and over again from multiple different sources. But this multi-front war that we're facing, this cultural war we're facing here at home, is getting insane. And I don't know if you've noticed, but it's almost like we have two completely different ideologies, two completely different societies trying to coexist with one another. And it's just not working, folks. And never in my life have I heard the term or the phrase, it's time for a national divorce. I've never heard that before. Within the last couple years, I've heard that term at least 10 to 15 times. In fact, there's been whole stories written about it, and that may be one of the stories we get into today. But a national divorce is understandable why people would want one, because you just feel like this relationship we're in with the left and the right is just toxic, man. It's just a toxic relationship, and we no longer have anything in common. The left and right, the Democrats and Republicans, we do not have anything in common anymore. We have nothing in common, nothing. I mean, you could say we have little things in common like, we want to be good to our families and we want to be good people morally. But as far as ideas and our plans for the future of this country do not align at all. They used to, but that is increasingly deteriorating right now. And I think one of the reasons is obviously we have this weird woke ideology that has been rising and festering like a just an infected blister on America that's finally coming to a head. And this woke ideology is completely taking over our entire culture. It's taking over our country. It's taking over every aspect of our nation. Every orifice and every nook and cranny is being taken over by this woke ideology from the top down. And it's not like this is something a fringe group of people, but this has spread worldwide. And the United States of America is now the #1 exporter of bad ideas. And that sucks to say that, but it is true, and it's not something I'm gleeful to say. But the United States is indeed the #1 exporter of bad ideas, dumb ideas, this woke ideology, this cancer that completely destroys anything that it comes in contact with. And so I was kind of sitting back after all the Trump indictment stuff, after everything was happening. I was like, look, I have to, me personally, just doing all the research, and you guys know that I do nothing but read the news. I do nothing but read into everything that's going on. It's like it's almost like a phobia for me. I have to know what is going on. I have to be up to date with everything, because in my mind, I have to make things make sense so that I can understand them. And the one way that I do that is I kind of sit back and get like a 10,000-foot view of everything, and I start consolidating things into what I think the problems are. It may not come down to a single point, but I consolidate them down to 1 or 2 problems that I see, and then I start coming up with solutions. Well, it's hard in our current situation for the simple fact that this is a multi-front cultural war. This is a war on our culture, there's no doubt. There's a war on religion, there's a war on ideas, there's a war on everything. There's a war on every single thing that the left and right used to agree on. So, and this is exactly why we see things like this Nashville shooting. So, after the shooting, it instantly went from, there was this tragic shooting, this psychopath, this woman killed 3 innocent kids and 3 innocent adults at a school. And it instantly went from this woman. Well, people were saying her and woman and she and all this other stuff. And then so the left started getting irate about misgendering the shooter. It is completely disgusting. Nobody even really cares. But somehow this has made a major impact. Not really a major impact. This is just another example of how our culture and how this wokeism is just infecting every orifice of this country. So the other night, I don't know if you heard it, but Winsome Sears was on the Bill Maher show, and she was on there with I guess a transgender activist. I'm not really sure, but you can kind of see it then. This was about a week ago. You could see it then exactly what was happening. And you could see how it kind of morphed into this cultural battle of misgendering the shooter. Here, check this out.
Well, what's interesting, if you've noticed, they are misgendering and dead naming the murderer, right? They are referring to the murderer by their given name, not their chosen name.
Right.
And by their, referring to her as a woman, as opposed to what her identity apparently was a man.
Right.
Which is not the way the media usually does these things. They're usually very particular about the subjective sense of gender identity and respecting that. If someone says they're a man, then they're a man. But in this case, they're not doing that.
Hang on. You know what? This person murdered 6 people. I don't really care who you say you are. You murdered 6 people and 3 of them were children. You don't get a say. Well, she's dead now, so, but you don't get a say in telling us who you are and what you're about. You killed 6 people.
Okay, but let's
really
take
matters.
her out of this and just...
All right, so here's what I'm saying.
Talk about the issue without the
So
murderer.
the issue then, well, no, because you brought it out, so we can talk about it. So now we're on to something else. But here's the thing. I'm a parent all day. I get to decide what happens in my child's life. Not you, not the government, not anybody. I don't co-parent. I had this child. I'm responsible for this child. Anything happens to little Johnny, you're calling me, right? As you should. Right. So what I'm saying, hang on. So what I'm saying now is, if I don't want my child given lap dances at school by a drag queen, I don't want it done.
Right.
That's happening.
But do you think the state should have the right? Do you think the state should have the right to interfere?
I'm talking about as a parent.
Well,
I am a parent. Forget the state. I'm a parent.
Lap dances.
This is my child. I will make a decision about what happens with my child.
I'm not sure lap dances.
It's happening. Don't you see it?
No, there's drag queen story hour. There are definitely drag queens reading to children.
There are drag queens that are doing pole dances. There are drag queens that are
in school.
You.
What?
Bill, you gotta read more.
I guess I
do. Yeah, folks, it is absolutely happening. And if you recall, in the very beginning of this whole transgender ideology, this whole obsession with transgenderism, before it really started getting to the point what it is now, you remember these people completely denying that it was ever happening in our schools. And now that's changed. Now it's went from, oh, it's not even happening in the schools to, oh, well, now it needs to be accepted by everybody. And now it's, oh, we know it's happening in the schools, and it should happen in the schools. And if you don't like it, then you could take your kids out of the schools. Well, folks, these are public schools, okay? And these are taxpayer-funded schools. These are schools that all taxpayers are paying for. Even people without kids have to pay for schools. They have to pay state tax, or they have to pay taxes, whether it's state tax or property tax, that goes into the school system. So that's just not right. And so it's just very bizarre, this entire transgender ideology. And it's just another thing. It's the transgender thing, when not that long ago it was BLM. It's always something. It's always some kind of conflict that the left and the right have to be fighting. Almost like it's necessary. Almost as if society cannot continue unless there's some kind of conflict between one or the other. And I feel like, me personally, as a recently new conservative, or I would say not really a Republican, but at me being a newer conservative, a newer member of the conservative movement, I find myself, I feel like the conservatives are just trying to just hold everything down. Everything's like almost, it's kind of hard to explain, but I feel like the conservative movement is just trying to hold these things back, as the left, it's like a game of tug of war is what it is. And it's like our culture is just swinging violently one side to the other. And this is where politics come in. Because if you haven't noticed, 20, 30 years ago, politics was boring. There was really nothing, there was nothing exciting about politics. But now it's so in your face. Every single thing is political. Every single person you talk to in any conversation, when you're talking to a random person or a friend or somebody you just meet, politics somehow finds a way into the conversation. And that, to me, is bizarre. And so politics has most certainly turned into some type of religion. And that's one of the articles we're going to talk about today. And it's so bizarre how politics has infected every single part of our culture. And I think what it is, the tribalism has become so deep. This is, I'm sorry if I'm not making sense, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take my thoughts and I'm trying to do the consolidation process with you on the microphone. And sometimes this is, my brain just, it's hard for me to get it out in words. So the reason why I think people have become so tribal as far as politics is because politics are really starting to impact people's lives. Because depending on which side you support, if one wins, drastic changes are starting to happen in our culture almost overnight. And so that's why politics have become so tribal and so just important in everybody's lives, because they're not boring anymore. Politics isn't boring. There's real things happening in our nation's capital that are having real effect on people's lives. And so, like I said, when Donald Trump was in office, you had 4 years of conservative ideology. You had 4 years of conservatives having the keys to the castle, and they had the ball in their court. And so it was no wonder why conservative ideology was kind of spread out throughout the country. Well, when Democrats took power, when Joe Biden one, if you want to call it that, when Joe Biden was put and installed into power, they started invoking their ideologies. And their ideologies, and just like the same thing, it happened overnight. And these ideologies, our country is just not prepared for. It's so foreign to most Americans in the United States that the people just are not used to how these ideologies impact their lives. And so it's having a drastic effect on people's lives in every type of way, in their lifestyle, in their communities, in their wallet, in their finances, where they live, how they talk, who they talk to, what they read. It's crazy. And so politics is starting to turn into a religion. And if you haven't noticed, the more religion is removed from our society, is removed from American culture, the worse things get. And the more divided the country gets. Because you have the left, they want this new religion to take over our culture. And this is what happens. This is where like things like the 1619 Project comes in. And in order for them to take over the American culture, to take over the country, politically and culturally, they have to destroy the old country. They have to destroy the old country's history. And they have to destroy the perception of great America. And the when America was great and what America's founders had intended for this country. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that's why you see all this damage that's being done. And when I say in my other episodes how this looks purposeful, I really mean it. This is absolutely purposeful, and it's happening from the top down. And so it's no wonder you're really involved in politics, and more people are getting involved in politics. Obviously, we just had an election in 2020 where more people voted than ever before in history. And Donald Trump had got 74 or 75 million votes, which is the most in history other than Joe Biden. Donald Trump got more than Barack Obama and more than any other president, more than Reagan. And then Joe Biden somehow gets 81 million votes. Nobody knows to this day. But I'm telling you guys right now, that election cannot be trusted. Nobody can sit there and say that that was a legit election. That was bonkers. That election was completely insane. We were counting ballots for a month. They were calling states 2, 3, 4 weeks later. It was just a disaster. And then what made it even more weird was you had a government official coming out and saying right to everybody's face that this was the most secure election in United States history. Even though we had record amounts of mail-in ballots going out all over the country by the millions to houses that were vacant, and even though we had decreased the qualifications for an accepted ballot, like signature verification and so on and so forth. So even though we had record breaking of things we've never even done before, never even tried in this country, somehow it was the safest and the most secure election in United States history. Nobody for a second believes that. Not even the left believes that. Trust me. Because if the roles were reversed and it was Donald Trump that won the 2020 election, they would be doing the same thing. They would be challenging it, investigating it. And to this day, if Donald Trump would have won the 2020 presidency, they would be investigating him and impeaching him just like they did all through his previous presidency. So don't believe these people when they say they think it's the most secure election in United States history. Their examples that they use is the Krebs guy that comes out, and the cybersecurity guy comes out with doing, I think, a 2-day investigation and says this was the most secure election in his lifetime, or in the most secure election in United States history. And then William Barr comes out and says that he couldn't find any large amounts of fraud, at least any fraud that wouldn't make a difference. But what they're confusing is there was no fraud and there wasn't enough fraud to overturn the election. So what they'll say is there was absolutely no fraud in the 2020 election. And folks, that's just not true. Okay, there was fraud. There's always fraud in elections. The problem, so what they think is there just wasn't enough fraud. So that's okay. But that's an issue that we need to figure out for the simple fact that these elections are going to be coming down to the vote, man. It's going to be, in some of these states, it came down to 500 or 1,000 votes. Folks, Donald Trump only lost the election by like 14,000 votes throughout 3 or 4 different states. It's not like he lost the election by millions and millions of votes. He did not. Okay, he lost by a very, very small margin in a few states. Yeah, it was millions overall as far as the popular vote, but I'm talking about the Electoral College. Joe Biden only won by 14 or 15,000 votes throughout 3 or 4 different states. Okay, that's not that much. And so that goes to show you how important it is for us to get this fraud out of our elections. And believe it or not, Democrats like fraud. And that's why they do not care about election fraud. They don't care about anything. They don't care that Mark Elias and Perkins Coie are going around the country changing election laws. And speaking of that, the Wisconsin election that Republicans just lost the other night, that's going to come back and bite them, because that was a Supreme Court seat that's really going to come back. That's going to hurt the Republicans pretty bad in the election, the 2024 presidential election. You wait and see when it comes down to states and it comes down to places like Wisconsin, you're going to see that Supreme Court seat was extremely important to win, and the Republicans lost it. Didn't just lose it, lost it by a lot, by like 92% or something like that. It was a complete wash. And that is because, like I said, the politics is starting to become a religion, and so Democrats are there's just so much tribalism that they think it's a life and death situation to go out and vote. In reality, it kind of is, because if these kind of elections, if these presidential elections make such an impact on people's lives, on people's finances and their wallets and their personal lives, then you can most certainly guarantee that people are going to go out as if it's a life and death situation. And that's only going to get worse, folks. The more the left and the Democrat Party turn this wokeism into some kind of religion, the crazier our elections are going to get. And so that's why I say it's absolutely vital that we figure out and secure our elections immediately. This has to be the very first thing a Republican does as president. I don't hear really anybody talking about anything that's been done since 2020 as far as our election security and election integrity. I don't know, and I've been researching, I don't know of any big moves other than Kari Lake in Arizona. I don't even know of any cases that are currently happening that are actually securing our election, our election process. So, you know what? For people that think there was major shenanigans happening in 2020, there hasn't been really anything to fix it. And so I don't know how Republicans think they're going to win, and I'm talking about Republican politicians. I don't see how they think they're going to win anything if they don't get to the bottom of what happened in 2020. And if they don't start securing our elections, if they don't start increasing our election integrity, I don't know how they think they're going to win anything. Because to this day, nobody knows what happened in the 2020 election. It was a complete disaster. And so we're going to be going into 2024 with the same election process. So and this is what I'm talking about. You have to sometimes sit back and get just a 10,000 foot view of everything. And that's why I say this new culture, this wokeism culture, is absolutely destroying our country right now. And it's making it unrecognizable. So I have an article here from Fox News, and it's titled "America Unrecognizable and on the Brink of Collapse, Experts Warn." So, is America dying before our eyes? All societies eventually collapse, from the classical civilizations of ancient Rome and Greece to the ever-alarming decline of modern America. Could the past be hinting at what's in store? I've always said history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. That is true, folks. And guess what we don't teach as much in school? History. I did an episode about that, about the school systems and how they're failing our kids. One of the biggest failures we are bringing on to our future generations is we are not teaching history to our students. And listen, this is Democrats' move. This has always been their move. They've seen this decades ago. They started infecting these schools with their ideology way, way before we were even playing the same game. So what happened was Democrats started slowly but surely taking the flag out of schools, taking cultural history out of our schools, taking the pledge out of the schools, getting rid of history and how we teach history. So Democrats have been working on this for decades, and this is the culmination of the Democrats' work over those decades. And we're starting to see this come to the surface now. The article continues, with skyrocketing inflation, political division, social unrest, and a relentless effort to wipe away the fundamental principles of the nation, historians and scholars offer an elegy for what the country used to be and warn of what it has become. The America of the 1980s has pretty much vanished. Manhattan Institute senior fellow Chris Rufo said, "We're not entering a new period of unprecedented economic, social, and cultural change. We're in a very bizarre and unprecedented situation in our civilization today, which is we are turning on our own legacy and declaring it evil, oppressive, without any redeeming characteristics. There are some days I wake up and read the news and look around me and say, I don't recognize this country anymore." Stephen Hayward, a resident scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, added, "Among the devastating changes are unbearable living costs, anti-American woke sentimentality, infiltrating the nation's public schools and universities, riots in the streets of major U.S. cities, and the emboldening of the nation's greatest adversaries, including Russia and China. The gas prices, the housing crisis, the crisis with the education, with healthcare, one crisis after another. People have lost the hope that the future for America will be brighter than its past," Heritage Foundation President Dr. Kevin Roberts lamented. Yeah, and so if it feels like our nation is in a state of decline, folks, that's because it is. We are in a state of decline. The United States is just getting insane. And the gender ideology is a major inflection point on the problem that we're facing right now. Okay, so this whole gender ideology is just another piece to the Democrat playbook in infiltrating our culture and replacing it with their own ideology. Like I said, this is a culture war, and that's exactly how you got to think of it. You have to think of it as conservatives and leftists. One wants to conserve our culture and our founding and the fundamental principles of our country, and the other one wants to destroy it and rebuild from the ashes their own ideology. And so that's exactly how you need to understand this. Once you understand it in those terms, then I think people will start to pay more attention. I think people will start to get more involved in their local politics because, folks, local politics are the most important because those directly impact you the most. And a perfect example of that is COVID. When states around the country were doing their lockdowns, these crazy, tyrannical Soviet police states, when the left and the Democrats were turning their states into like police states, some Soviet Union stuff, you really started noticing how important your local elections are. And because you had school board seats, I mean, who was paying attention to their local school board seats? Nobody. Not even I was. And I've always been into politics. I've always been into news and politics, always, for as long as I can remember. And so I didn't even know where my school board seats were. I didn't know if they leaned left. I didn't know if they leaned right. But I found out during the lockdowns, and luckily, our school board seat was leaning conservative. And so we didn't have mandates. We didn't have mask mandates, even though the leftist Democrats, they were certainly trying to get those implemented. I seen some of the most disgusting acts of behavior during my school board committee hearings. I mean, some of the craziest stuff. I actually seen a woman. It was an elderly black woman. I actually watched her stand up and demand that the school board mandate segregation of the students. Yes, I seen that, and I actually tried finding it in the archives of our school board committee hearings, but I couldn't find it. I didn't really try that long. I'll try again. But yeah, folks, we had a woman that was demanding that the school board segregate our students in the school between vaccinated and masked and unvaccinated and unmasked. It was absolutely insane. And so this is what I'm talking about. It's this kind of behavior that is completely running roughshod over our entire country, over our entire culture, throughout our entire country. And so when Joe Rogan talks about this transgender and the outrage that we've seen by the dead naming or misgendering of the shooter, this is just one of those inflection points of what we're really facing. I have an article here from, let me see here. Rogan expressed contempt and shock at how wild it is that many people would defend the preferred gender identity of a school shooter. I have the conversation that Joe Rogan was having with Michael Schellenberger right here.
There's all these articles that came out about the misgendering of the school shooter, which is so
this is crazy.
Wild.
This is insane.
First of all, that person's dead. Okay? It doesn't matter if you call it a boy or a girl. That's a dead person who killed 3 children and 3 adults in a horrific way.
You made this, I think you were the first one that really that drew attention to that all the confusion around sex and gender was a symptom of civilizations in decline.
Yeah, well, I got it from Douglas Murray.
Oh, Douglas Murray.
Yeah, Douglas Murray talked about this, that it seems like every civilization, when they're at the brink of collapse, becomes obsessed with gender. And he talked about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and it just seems like a thing that people do when there's no real, like physical conflict.
Right.
So people look for conflict that doesn't exist, and they find conflict in standard norms. They find conflict in societal norms.
Yeah, I've always said that too. I totally agree. It's like, and I tell my wife this all the time, that it's not, I'm trying to think of a way to explain it to you. It's almost as if our society has had it so good for so long that the people start to invent conflicts with one another. And this isn't new, folks. This isn't new. This has always happened from the time that man has walked the earth. But now what it is we're starting to insert more extreme tribalism. So the dividing lines are becoming more defined. So you're starting to have, instead of having more of a middle independent, you're really starting to have 2 different sides. And both of them are becoming extremely tribal. And that's why this stuff is getting crazier and crazier. And we've seen this all throughout history. In every major society, that's how it is. So I have an article here from thephysics.org, and it's by the Field Museum. And I'm going to read a little bit of this article. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's extremely long, but I'm going to read a couple parts of this that I think will probably put what I was saying in a little bit better perspective. All good things must come to an end, whether societies are ruled by ruthless dictators or more well-meaning representatives. They fall apart in time, with different degrees of severity. In a new paper, anthropologists examined a broad global sample of 30 pre-modern societies. They found that when good governments, ones that provide goods and services to their people, and did not starkly concentrate wealth and power, fell apart, they broke down more intensely than collapsing despotic regimes. The states that had good governance, although they may have been able to sustain themselves slightly longer than autocratic-run ones, tended to collapse more thoroughly and more severely. We refer to an inexplicable failure of the principal leadership to uphold values and norms that had long guided the actions of previous leaders, followed by a subsequent loss of citizen confidence in the leadership and government and collapse. In their study, Blanton, Feynman, and their colleagues took an in-depth look at governments of 4 societies: the Roman Empire, China's Ming Dynasty, India's Mughal Empire, and the Venetian Republic. These societies flourished hundreds, or in ancient Rome's case, thousands of years ago, and they had comparatively more equitable distributions of power and wealth than many of the other cases examined. Although they looked different from what we consider good governments today, there were basically no electoral democracies before modern times. So if you want to compare good governance in the present with good governance in the past, you can't really measure it by the role of elections. You have to come up with some other yardsticks, and the core features of the good governance concept serve as a suitable measure of that, says Feynman. They didn't have elections, but they had other checks and balances on the concentration of personal power and wealth by a few individuals. They all had means to enhance social well-being, provision goods and services beyond just a narrow few, and means for commoners to express their voices. In societies that met the academic definition of good governance, the government meets the needs of the people, in large part because the government depends on those people for the taxes and resources that keep the state afloat. These systems depended heavily on the local population for a good chunk of their resources, kind of like us. Even if you don't have elections, the government has to be at least somewhat responsive to the local population, because that's what funds the government, explains Feynman. There are often checks on both the power and the economic selfishness of leaders, so they can't hoard all the wealth. Societies with good governments tend to last a bit longer than autocratic governments that keep power concentrated to one person or small group. But the flip side of that coin is that when a good government collapses, things tend to be harder for the citizens, because they've come to rely on the infrastructure of the government in their day-to-day life. With good governance, you have infrastructures for communication and bureaucracies to collect taxes, sustain services, and distribute public goods. You have an economy that jointly sustains the people and funds the government, says Feynman. And so social networks and institutions become highly connected economically, socially, and politically. Whereas if an autocratic regime collapses, you might see a different leader or you might see a different capital, but it doesn't permeate all the way down into people's lives. As such, rulers generally monopolize resources and fund their regimes in ways less dependent on local production or broad-based taxation. The researchers also examined a common factor in the collapse of societies with good governance: leaders who abandoned the society's founding principles and ignored their roles as moral guides for their people. In a good governance society, a moral leader is one who upholds the core principles and ethos and creeds and values of the overall society, says Feynman. Most societies have some kind of social contract, whether that's written out or not, and if you have a leader who breaks those principles, then people lose trust, diminish their willingness to pay taxes, move away, or take other steps that undercut the physical health of the polity. This pattern of a moral leadership destabilizing their societies goes way back. The paper uses the Roman Empire as an example. So history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And right now we have an administration that is going completely against our moral and societal norms. Okay, this is why things are seeming to collapse very, very fastly. And just like the study suggests, very severely too. It's not just like they're going to replace a new emperor at the top and everything's going to be good. No, when these type of governments collapse, it's bad. I mean, it's really, really bad. I mean, you have basically a complete destruction and then reconstruction of an entire society. So the thing is what is our country founded on? What were the fundamental principles this country was founded on? Religion, folks. That is what the problem is. So all of this, and I've been saying this for years, the more religion is taken out of the schools, out of the population, the worse things get. And so that's exactly what we're up against now. We have a leftist ideology, a leftist regime that is stripping the religion from our country and then trying to replace their own woke religion, this woke ideology. And that's exactly what's happening. And that's why you see the dividing line so defined. That's why you see each side consolidating with one another. You have hardly nobody in the middle anymore. I was probably one of the few. Okay, I was probably one of the few remaining independents in this country. And I found myself, as I got older and I started entering adulthood, having a family, starting a business or whatever it is, and going to work and having, responsibility, I found myself lining up more with the conservatives than the left. In my previous episode, I talk about how the left is trying to attract younger and younger voters because the Democrats know they have to run on emotions in order to win elections. They cannot run on their ideas because their ideas suck and they usually always hurt people. And so Democrats need emotions so that they can keep their voters. That's what it is. So I found myself as a Democrat, and then they left me in the middle as an independent, and then I found myself aligning more with the conservatives. This was the timeline of my political views. And so that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with the part of our country's population stripping the religion, stripping the fundamental foundations, stripping the fundamental principles of our country out of our society, away from our country and away from our culture. And that is religion, folks. We see religion everywhere. We see it on our currency. We used to see it in our schools. We see it in our monuments. We see it in our statues. Religion Christian Judaism and all this is completely what our country was founded on, all the way back from its founders. And so we have a part of the population, we have the left trying to destroy all that so that they can rebuild with their own ideology. And that is this woke ideology. So speaking of Michael Schellenberger, he did an article back in November of 21, and it's titled, "Why is Wokeism a Religion?" And this is his Substack, so you can go and read this for yourself. But I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's a little long, but it makes a lot of sense with what I'm talking about now. This is going to kind of explain it a little bit better than I can. So here we go. Over the last year, a growing number of progressives and liberals have pointed to police killings of unarmed black men, rising carbon emissions and extreme weather events, and the killing of trans people as proof that the United States has failed to take action on racism, climate change, and transphobia. Others have pointed to the war on drugs, the criminalization of homelessness, and the mass incarceration as evidence that little has changed in the U.S. over the last 30 years. And yet, on each of those issues, the U.S. has made significant progress. Police killings of African Americans in our 58 largest cities declined from 217 per year in the 1970s to 157 per year in the 2010s. Between 2011 and 2020, carbon emissions declined 14% in the U.S., more than in any other nation, while just 300 people died from natural disasters, a more than 90% decline over the past century. Public acceptance of trans people is higher than ever. The total U.S. prison and jail population peaked in 2008 and has declined significantly ever since. Just 4% of state prisoners, who are 87% of the total prison population, are in for nonviolent drug possession. Just 14% are in for any nonviolent drug offense. And many large cities, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle, have effectively decriminalized public camping by homeless people. Progressives respond that these gains obscure broad inequalities and are under threat. Black Americans are killed at between 2 or 3 times the rate of white Americans, according to a Washington Post analyst of police killings between 2015 and 2020. Carbon emissions are once again rising as the U.S. emerges from the COVID pandemic, and scientists believe global warming is contributing to extreme weather events in 2020. Human Rights Campaign found that at least 44 transgender and non-gender conforming people were killed, which is the most since it started tracking fatalities in 2013, and already that number has reached 45 this year. Drug prohibition remains in effect, homeless people are still being arrested, and the U.S. continues to have one of the highest rates of incarceration in the world. But those numbers, too, obscure important realities. There are no racial differences in police killings when accounting for whether or not the suspect was armed or a threat. Basically, justified versus unjustified shooting. While carbon emissions will rise in 2021, there is every reason to believe they will continue to decline in the future, so long as natural gas continues to replace coal and the nuclear power plants continue operating. While climate change may be contributing to extreme weather events, neither the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change nor any other scientific body predicts it will outpace rising resilience to cause an increase in deaths from natural disasters. Researchers do not know if trans people are being killed disproportionately in comparison to cisgender people, if trans homicides are rising, or if trans people are being killed for being trans rather than for some other reason. 26 states have decriminalized marijuana, and California and Oregon have decriminalized and legalized, respectively, the possession of all drugs. Progressive district attorneys in San Francisco and Los Angeles and other major cities have scaled back prosecutions against people for breaking many laws related to homelessness, including public camping, public drug use, and theft. And yet many Americans would be surprised to learn any of the above information. Some would reject it outright as false. Consider that, despite the decline in police killings of African Americans and the share of the public which said police violence is a serious or extremely serious problem rose from 32% to 45% between 2015 and 2020, despite the decline in carbon emissions, 47% of the public agreed with the statement. Carbon emissions have risen in the United States over the last 10 years, and just 16% disagreed. Meanwhile, 46% of Americans agree with the statement, deaths from natural disasters will increase in the future due to climate change, and just 16% disagreed, despite the absence of any scientific scenario supporting such fears. And despite the lack of good evidence, mainstream news media widely reported that the killings of trans people is on the rise. The gulf between reality and perception is alarming for reasons that go beyond the importance of having an informed electorate for a healthy liberal democracy. Distrust of the police appears to have contributed to the nearly 30% rise in homicides after the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests last year, both by emboldening criminals and causing a pullback of police. A growing body of research finds the news media coverage of climate change is contributing to the rising levels of anxiety and depression among children, and there is good reason to fear that misinformation about the killing of trans and non-gender conforming individuals contributes to anxiety and depression amongst trans and transgender dysphoric youth. So this is what's happening. This is what I think is happening. The leftists are destroying our religion, and they're replacing it with their own. And that's exactly what they're doing. With the help of the media, the disgraceful, dishonest, leftist propaganda media, the Pravda media. That is what they're doing. They're taking our religion out of schools, and they're taking our religion out of culture and society, and they're replacing it with their own. And that's why you're supposed to celebrate transgender flags. That's why you're supposed to celebrate the LGBTQ flag. So it's perfectly okay to fly a BLM flag, but it's not okay to fly an American flag. You see what I'm saying? Everybody notices this. Everybody sees it for what it is. The problem is what can you do about it? And listen, folks, there's no doubt that we are bumping heads on this. There is no doubt that we are coming to a head in this culture war. And it's not going to end anytime soon. It's actually going to get worse. It's going to get much worse. Because you have two completely different ideologies going up against each other. And there's just no way both can coexist at all. Okay, we have nothing in common with the left anymore. Nothing. The conservatives have nothing in common with the liberal Democrats. Nothing. Not the liberal Democrats, the leftist Democrats. Okay, so we got to come up with a solution here. And that's where you hear the phrase, a national divorce. And ladies and gentlemen, that's not something we need. So instead of a national divorce, what if I told you that the founding fathers installed basically an emergency solution, a ripcord per se, maybe a break in case of emergencies kind of thing. Well, they did. And they did it, and they put it in our Constitution, and it's called the Convention of States. So I have an article here from the Civics and Citizenship, dated October 14th, 2022. What is a Convention of States? I'm sure you've heard this a lot before. It's becoming increasingly popular because of the more society gets divided, the more our culture is divided, the more people are trying to come up with solutions to keep this country a whole so that we can defend ourselves better. And it's not a national divorce. What we need is a convention of states. That's exactly what we need. What's all this talk about a convention of states? What is it exactly? It's an agreement of at least 2/3 of the state legislatures, 34 states, to call a meeting, a convention, to discuss specific proposals regarding an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The states have never used this provision of Article 5 to amend the Constitution. But in recent years, there has been a call for a convention of states. It has fallen short of the 2/3 requirements thus far. A convention of states is not a constitutional convention. Rewind. It is not a constitutional convention. There has only been one constitutional convention. There is no provision in our Constitution to completely change, rewrite, or revise the U.S. Constitution, which calls itself the supreme law of the land. What Article 5 says about the Convention of States: the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution. So we, the people, can revise or add amendments through a resolution in Congress or through a convention of states. We can also repeal certain powers if one branch of government has fallen out of the balance with the other two. In any case, the new proposal must be ratified by 3/4 of all states, so that's 38 states. The amendment process is difficult by design. It is difficult to make changes to the Constitution. That is the design of our founders. Please know that the resolution, whether initiated by Congress, 2/3 of both houses, or by the Convention of States, 34 states, has to be exactly the same. Not even a comma can be added or subtracted. That would require starting the process all over again. This is important, as at least one amendment, the 16th Amendment, has been discovered to have discrepancies in its passage. Perhaps Congress or Convention of States will rectify this in our lifetime. We shall see. So, you're probably wondering how many states have passed the Convention of States. And so, I have a map here, and as of right now, there is 19 states that have passed the Conventions of States application. And there are, so the states that have the application that is passed in one chamber but not the other is New Mexico, Iowa, South Dakota, Virginia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Wyoming. And then the rest of the states that are considering the Convention of States resolution in 2023. And so that's essentially, so we have 19 states, okay? And then 19, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you have 8 that have passed in one chamber, but not the other. And then you have, it looks like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So you have 20 that are considering the Convention of States resolution in 2023. So right there you have 28. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, you have 28 right there plus 19. So you have 19 states that have passed it. So regardless, folks, that's my solution to the problem. I think we need a call for a Convention of States. That's what we need instead of a national divorce, because, ladies and gentlemen, I fear we're going to go to civil war. That is what's going to happen. And it's not going to be good at all, considering we're on the brink of World War III right now with other countries trying to replace us as the number one superpower. So I think getting this Convention of States done and figured out is vital to keeping this country going as long as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, if it weren't for the left trying to completely change our culture and our society, I think conservatives and Republicans would be pretty well together right now. You know, as long as we kept God and religion in our society, in our culture, as long as we kept our fundamental principles that the country was founded on, if we kept those in place, I think this country would be fine. But you have the left who completely threw a wrench in the entire system. So in their minds, they feel like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights sucks, it's too old, and it needs to be replaced. So they feel like this country is no good, that it needs to be replaced with something better. And they feel like their way is the better way for everybody to live. They feel like their ideas are better, they feel like they're smarter and better than everybody, that if we just shut up and listen to them, then everything's going to be fine. Well, folks, you can't have that, because their ideas suck, okay? And not only that, but if you want to do something like that, then go fight for your own country. You know what I mean? The founders of this country, our past generations, have already fought a revolutionary war over this. You know, we already spilt blood for this country. So there's no way conservatives and Republicans are going to allow the leftist Democrats to come in and completely strip everything from this country so that they can invoke their own ideas. It's just not going to happen. But they're not going to give up either. But I think what used to happen in the past, before there was social media, is these small fringe group of people would come up with these ideas, and they would get on their soapbox and they would tell everybody their ideas, and then people would look at them and just tell them, yeah, your ideas suck. Go home. But now with social media, this small fringe group of people have extremely loud voices, and that's exactly what they do. They're extremely good at owning the language. They're extremely good at creating narratives, and not to mention they own almost 95% of the media outlets. They have all the power in our society. They own the academia, they own the media, they own the culture pretty much. They own the popular opinion for people, so they can use Hollywood to spread their ideas, and they can use the media to spread their ideas, and then they have their ideas, they teach their ideas in the schools. That's why you're seeing a failure of our schools. That's why you're seeing a failure in our media. And that's why you're seeing a failure in our entire culture, is because these people are trying to destroy this place on purpose, ladies and gentlemen. They're trying to do it on purpose. So we need some kind of ripcord on this. And I believe that is the Convention of States. So that's exactly what we need to do. That is my solution for this. And I hope you guys understood what this show was about, because I feel like I just rambled on and I didn't really give you a good explanation. So hopefully it makes sense, but that's what I was thinking about today. So I kind of just did my entire breakdown, my thought process with you here on the microphone. And so hopefully it makes sense. I didn't write it down. I didn't highlight any points or anything like I probably should have. So hopefully it makes sense to you guys. But I feel like that is one solution that we need to use. We cannot go to civil war, folks. We cannot. And we surely can't fight a multi-front war. We can't fight the rest of the world as we're fighting each other here in the country. So Americans need to come together and unite. And the one way we can do that is by one common idea. And that idea is patriotism, love for this country, and love for thy God. That is what we've always been on, and that is what we need to continue to go on. And it is no mystery why the more religion is taken out of our culture and taken out of our society, the worse things get. This transgenderism, this entire woke ideology is turning into a religion, and it's destroying our country. It's infecting our entire country like a cancer. Okay, with the transgenderism, the racism, the systematic racism, the wokeness is what it is. And these people claim that Republicans and conservatives don't even know what wokeness is. We know what it is, folks. We know exactly what it is. And this White House is just adopting it. I don't know whoever is guiding Joe Biden around, whoever is whispering in this guy's ear. I would really like to know who that is. I have a feeling it may be somebody like Susan Rice or Barack Obama. Somebody's in there telling Joe Biden what to do, because this guy is just way too radical right now than we've ever seen before. And what's a shame is he governed as a moderate, but now he's an extreme radical. And so they are indeed, I think this is the third term of Obama. And you guys remember when Obama said we're going to fundamentally change our country for generations or forever. Well, that's not what this is for, folks. We have a constitution and we have a Bill of Rights. We're not supposed to see broad sweeping changes through our country. Everything's supposed to be relatively the same all the time. Politics is supposed to be boring, folks. That's by design. It's supposed to be boring and uninteresting. But what happened was Republicans and conservatives sat back with their feet up and kind of just expected the government to have their best interest and know that they were going to be under attack by this new ideology infecting the government and infecting our culture. Well, instead of our government fighting this back, instead of our government putting up the blockade and shielding our culture and shielding our nation from these awful, awful ideas, they just opened the floodgates and let this stuff in. And so now this ideology has infected every orifice of our country, from top all the way down to the bottom. I have one last audio clip that I want to play you. It's Victor Davis Hanson. It kind of explains this perfectly. And it kind of wraps everything up that I've been saying, and he explains it a lot better than I can. So here, check this out.
You've recently written a piece called "The Establishment is the Revolution." What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you look at in the 60s, people were marching on the campus president's office to demand change. Now the campus president is the one that's suppressing free speech. Norman Mailer wrote a novel, Armies of the Night, that were going to march on the Pentagon for social change, etc. But the Pentagon's inaugurating, everything from subsidized transgender surgeries to hunting out supposed white rage and white supremacy in the ranks on its own, by its own volition. I could go on, Mark, but I guess all the institutions themselves, whether it's Disney or American Airlines or where I work, Stanford University, they're agents of revolutionary change, and they have enormous wealth, power, reputations, influence. So it's a top-down woke revolution, the establishment against us, the people.
So the establishment, the words are almost contradictory, but it makes sense. The establishment is the revolution. In other words, these are the people who are upending our society. These are the people who are promoting I'll call it anti-white racism. These are the people who are stereotyping minorities. These are the people who have the borders open in the most outrageous immigration policies this nation has ever known. These are the people who reject capitalism and embrace socialism. These are the people who are brainwashing our children and going after the parents and and going after pro-lifers, and they never had to raise a finger in violence. You're saying they just do it.
They just do it. I mean, the last 4 directors in succession of the FBI have one thing in common. They've either misled Congress, or they've lied under oath to a federal investigator, or they've claimed amnesia. And when you look at Lois Lerner and the IRS, or you can look at, I mean, it reaches the level of absurdity. We have the Duchess of Sussex and Montecito lecturing us on white microaggressions against black people. And we've had this tragedy in Memphis. It was a horrible beating where 5 African-American officers in rogue fashion killed an innocent African-American, and yet the police chief is black, the assistant police chief is black, 60% of the force is black, nearly 70% of Memphis is black, and yet we have Van Jones, a recent recipient of a $100 million Bezos Prize, lecturing America that this is proof of racism. So these are revolutionary ideas that come from the people who are very, very wealthy.
So the leftist ideology has got into our government and has seeped into the top tiers of our government. It has seeped into the power brokers of our nation. It has infected our power brokers of our country like a cancer. And that's exactly what's happening right now. That's why we're seeing all this insanity. When you're looking around and you're like, this is insane. How can a New York district attorney just indict the lead running Republican nominee? How can this rogue district attorney from New York just indict his political opponents? It's absolutely insane. That is exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what they want. And that's why when you're looking around and you're seeing the military, like Mark Milley talking about he wants to understand his white rage, and you're seeing this entire ideology infect our military. And what's extremely worse is we are exporting these ideas to around the globe, and it is infecting every single nation that it's hitting like a cancer. Okay, so we have to do something. We have to stop this. I have no idea what to do, especially if they have control over our elections. We're going to find it extremely difficult to win any kind of power back if we don't have free and fair elections. Okay, because the Democrat Party has mastered the mail-in ballots. They have mastered the voting machine. They have mastered the elections. Republicans still want to do it the old-fashioned way on election day. And, you know, Democrats are playing a totally different game in a totally different stadium. So Republicans need to get into that stadium, get on that field, and start kicking some ass. And that's exactly what we need to do. So that's all I have for today's show. I hope I got the message out in an understandable way to where you guys could understand it. I was going to talk a little bit about the Donald Trump indictment, but everybody's talking about that right now. And I am almost certain that is nothing but a distraction from the Biden administration's complete and epic failures, and is nothing but a distraction. We'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm sure you've heard it from, you know, every other news outlet, every podcast, every radio host is talking about the Trump indictment. And folks, I just don't think it's going to go anywhere. At the very most, it's going to get appealed in an appellate court, you know, just like Alan Dershowitz said. And, you know, I'll pretty much take whatever legal expertise that guy gives. I'm going to go ahead and take that as a statement of fact, because that guy's a genius when it comes to law. He was the youngest law professor at Harvard Law School, and he's been doing it for 60 years. So, and he's not even a Republican. He votes Democrat. In fact, I think he voted for Joe Biden. So I'm going to take what he says I'm going to take him for his word when he says nothing's going to come up of this. But what needs to happen, what I just read, I was just scrolling through the news. Jim Jordan has issued the first subpoena to District Attorney Alvin Bragg. So we're going to start seeing subpoenas flying around and finding out what exactly is happening with this district attorney, this rogue district attorney indicting Republican nominees and interfering in our election system. But that's what they do, folks. That's the Democrats. They don't mess around, man. They're playing for blood. They don't mess around. It's a zero-sum game for these people. They show no mercy and they take no prisoners. And that's exactly how Republicans need to act. But what I'm afraid of is that breaking out into some kind of civil war. But I think it's inevitable, folks. If we don't pull the ripcord on the Convention of States, then I fear this country is going to be heading into some kind of civil war. In fact, I feel like sometimes it's almost too late. The leftist woke ideology has infected too much of our culture and our society. There's almost no turning back now, unless we start putting these fundamental principles back into our future generations, back into the schools. Start teaching the kids history again. And not the 1619 project, just real history. Not woke history, not hate America because it's systemically racist history. Just teach the real history, okay? That's what we need to do. And for the love of God, put religion back in schools, okay? And I'm sorry, folks, but I just feel like it's too late for that. The schools have already been overtaken. The schools have been overtaken already, and at this point, it's almost best to just take your kids out and homeschool them. I know it's not an option for most of us. It's definitely not an option for me. You have to have a 2-income family. You have to. There's no surviving in this economy with a single income. Those days are long gone, folks. And especially now, the Biden's economy is even worse. You almost need 3 incomes. And so unless we get these fundamental basic problems fixed, that we're not going to see things get better. And the only way to get them fixed is by fighting for them, by playing the Democrats' game, playing their game for a little bit. That's what we could do. And that's what we need to do. And and climate change is another thing. That's another religion. The climate change has turned into a religion too. And I did an episode a couple months ago about how climate change is turning into a religion. Maybe I'll do another episode. But, and I can't say this quote enough, but G.K. Chesterton, he said a famous quote that any man that doesn't believe in God, it's not that they don't believe in nothing, it's that they'll believe in anything. And that's exactly what we're talking about. That's exactly what we're seeing today. We see people just willing to believe in anything, whether it's climate change, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's this wokeism ideology. They're willing to believe in anything. And the secularists have completely overtaken our society. So it almost seems like it's the secularists versus the Christians. It's the woke religion versus the Christian religion. It's good versus evil. That's what it seems like it is. So anyways, make sure you share the show with your friends and family. Thank you guys for tuning in. And if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me at StephenTorrielloShow@gmail.com. And you could find the show on any podcast platform. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Getter, Truth Social, any of them. You can find me on any of the platforms. Just type in the Stephen Torriello Show or just Stephen Torriello Show. You should find it. Oh, I have a Locals channel. That's Stephen Torriello's at Locals. And also, guys, if you could subscribe to my show on Rumble, I would really appreciate that. That would help out a lot. I'm trying to get enough subscribers so I can get my own private URL. And once I get my own private URL, and it's so much easier to share it when I could just put the Rumble URL on my comment section on the stuff that I post. So it's a lot easier to promote the show on Rumble if you have your own Rumble URL. And in order to do that, you have to have so many followers. So if you could, please, I would really appreciate it if you followed the show on Rumble. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys have a good day. Have a good week. God bless you, and God bless America. You guys have a good day. Bye-bye.